A new Toxic Avenger film is going to be releasing, and I can't think of a better way to exploit its newfound surge in popularity than to release a tier list of all the old films. Welcome to YouTube. Hello everyone, Marcos here, hideously deformed creature, superhuman size strength, and today I will be tier listing each individual Toxic Avenger film that has been released thus far. The new film will be released in about a week from when I'm recording this, and probably a few days before I actually release this video, so that won't be featured here, but I will probably do a separate video of that when that comes out. So, I'd like to get into it, but first, let's talk a little bit about my history with the Toxic Avenger films.
I remember cooking dinner and you're like, Mom, can I watch Toxic Avenger?
I'd like you to state your name once again.
My name is Nina Richardson, or Selena Richardson.
And what is your relationship to the interviewer?
I'm his mother. Watch it. And so I'm thinking, it's a superhero movie, I'm cooking, no big deal. All of a sudden you're like, I sat down, while I'm waiting for food to get done, being cooked before dinner. I'm sitting down, I'm watching this movie. And I'm watching the part that a bunch of the high school kids, it was not too far after the pool scene. So it must have been the opening scene, right? The pool scene when he's at the pool, he's cleaning, they're giving him a hard time, that sort of thing, right? And so shortly after that, they show the same kids in the car, right? And so they're in the car, they're driving down the street, and all of a sudden they hit somebody, and they're like literally tallying how many people that they're killing. Yeah.
He hits a kid on a bike.
Yes.
They drive past him, and they're like, and if you just saw that, it's like, it's violent.
Yes.
It's bad, and it's a 12-year-old boy.
It's a young one, yes.
You're like, okay, that's bad, right? And then they're still driving, and at one moment, somebody tells the driver to stop. He's still moving.
Yes.
And then they reverse and doesn't cut away or anything, crushes the kid's head.
And so I'm sitting there as a young mom, because I'm a young mom, because you're my firstborn. So I'm sitting there with my jaw dropping, like, what in the world is this? And I looked and I was like, Mark, I said, what are you watching? You're like, Mom, Toxic Avenger.
The Toxic Avenger was released in 1984 and was written and directed by Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hers, and in my opinion, this is probably the best movie that Lloyd Kaufman has made, including the other Toxic Avenger films. Before the Toxic Avenger, Troma was mostly known for distributing low-budget, raunchy teen sex comedies, and would put out grindhouse-level horror movies as well. And one day, Lloyd Kaufman had the brilliant idea of mixing the peanut butter and chocolate together and made a raunchy teen sex comedy horror grindhouse film, and thus we got the Toxic Avenger. And as you can gather from the little interview I had with my mom earlier, this was one of my favorite movies growing up, and I still do have a soft spot for it. I admit that I may be overrating it a bit. I think this movie has a lot of charm to it. I think it is smartly written for a Lloyd Kaufman Troma movie. I don't know what happened as their films go on. The quality of writing becomes more juvenile, becomes more overtly or purposefully offensive. In a way that is like not funny, but the Toxic Avenger, this original movie, does strike a great balance between being completely insane, being cartoonish, being like a Looney Tunes movie, and being brutally violent, horrifically gory, and outwardly sexual in a way that a lot of movies aren't anymore. And that's not putting a value on, sexuality in movies. It's just, you don't see those kind of movies very often anymore, at least not to like this level of immaturity. We're introduced to a very nerdy janitor of a fitness club who is basically bullied by everyone. But in particular, there's a group of psychopathic, drug-dealing, murdering teenage weightlifters. Although I'm not exactly sure if they're teenagers, they're probably played by people who are in their mid to late 20s, but it feels like they're supposed to be in high school. That's not exactly clear, but it gives me that impression. At one point, this group of child-murdering, racial slur-yelling psychopaths fool the janitor into wearing a tutu and meeting an attractive young woman at the pool in the health club. Well, of course, it was shown as to be a prank, and the entire health club bullies the nerdy janitor into running through the halls and jumping out a window, in which he lands into a barrel of toxic waste. And thus Toxie is born. What I like on watching this movie, and I do watch this one fairly frequently, not so much the others, but this one I do watch from time to time and still enjoy to this day, is that the world around Toxie or Melvin is completely screwed. Tromaville is a nightmare urban wasteland in somewhere in New Jersey, but Melvin Toxie is like a happy-go-lucky, aw shucks Boy Scout superhero who's just trying to do good for his town, and his town is an absolute nightmare. They completely play that part of it straight. He is a dork, but he is endearing. He only wants to do good for people. And his version of good, being a hideously deformed monster of supersize and strength, very often leads to gruesome murder. The effects are very clearly low budget, but I think for the most part they look pretty decent. Toxie himself looks pretty good in this movie. Not great. I think the second and third movie may look a little bit better, or at least the effects are a little bit nicer. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We also get some decent shots, like they actually cared about what the camera was looking at, and I really like the scenes where Toxie is roaming the streets and you see the sunset in the background and he's running around super heroically, and they also kind of play with that a little bit. They give him like the classic Superman role where he's coming out of a mild manner news reporter suit into the Toxic Avenger, but of course he's this freakish monster with his face, so it's not like he's fooling anyone, but I like those kind of funny references. I like the range of villains in the movie as well. You get the crazy bozo and his group of psychos, and you also get the mayor that is kind of pulling the strings on everything. I really think that you can feel the effort that they're putting into this movie. That, yes, although it's low budget, although it is a bit silly, they really try to put everything that they could on the screen. To the special effects, to the acting performances, to the general look and feel, the storyline. It's silly, but one thing leads to the next. You don't feel like anything is coming in at random. There's a couple random jokes here and there, but it's not overwhelming. Most of the humor comes within the story, within the plot, and within the characters. It's not a lot of outside references or Family Guy style humor of, hey, remember this reference? There, like I said, there's a tiny bit of that, but it is mostly self-contained within this story. It doesn't go to parody movie level. It's not like Scary Movie or Epic Movie or any of those other disaster movie. All of those kind of ridiculous, rapid fire jokes coming from nowhere style movies. It's all self-contained. It's all built up in a way that makes sense for the film it is. You may think a lot of it's silly and pointless. Sure, I would agree with that a lot of times, but at the very least, it's all built within its own world. The relationship between Toxie and Sarah, I think, is also really sweet and funny. Sarah, being a blind woman, is not able to tell what Toxie looks like, so she falls in love with his voice, his actions of being a hero, and the fact that he is like a 7-foot monster of a mutated man. But she's a sweet and silly character, and I like how their relationship builds between each other. It feels strangely genuine. And I think that's a great way to describe this movie overall. It is strangely genuine. It doesn't have the cynicism that a lot of these trauma movies have, where they're just crapping out a dumb, low-budget comedy to satiate their hardcore fans. It really feels like they were trying to build something here. And I think the trauma films from the 80s to very early 90s do feel that way as well, where they are actually a real movie company trying to make real low-budget movies. And later on, once their reputation was built and they grew a fan base that is more into shock humor than they are into good movies or things that were artfully made or things that were intentionally made by a auteur or a director or an artist in any way, all kind of falls to the wayside, and it's just shock humor after shock humor. And I think they really lose something once they pass that initial stage of the Toxic Avenger or Class of Nukem High. I think that era of trauma had quite a lot of charm, which the later era doesn't quite match. My heart wants to give the original Toxic Avenger an S tier. And nostalgia for me, nostalgia states that it is indeed an S tier movie. But in the scope of movies, even in the scope of low budget, grindhouse B horror films, there's still better ones than the Toxic Avenger, but this is a very good one. It spawned a franchise, it spawned toys, it exists even to this day, so it does hold a lot of importance. But As a movie, there are some things it's lacking, and I think under its own power, it does get to an A tier. And hey, nostalgia might even be putting it to A for me, but I actually stand behind it. I think it is, to this day, a very entertaining movie. It's a kind of sweet movie, endearing, but also gross and dumb and a lot of fun. And herein lies the problem with making this particular series a tier list, because all the other movies are much worse. I basically spoiled it. Not only are they much worse, like some of them are genuinely bad movies that I don't think that I would recommend to anyone, even people who like these kind of things. The Halloween tier list worked a bit better because there was a lot more movies. There were some movies in there that I had not seen before, so there's genuine surprise, like, hey, what do I really feel about this? I don't know, let's go through them. But the rest of these movies are pretty bad, so I think I'm going to switch up the formula here. So instead of tier listing every single Toxic Avenger movie because they're all pretty bad, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the remaining Toxic Avenger properties against the original. So how does the second movie stack up, the third movie, the TV show, the fourth movie, and all of that? How does that live up to the original idea of the Toxic Avenger? And I'm going to call this the Toximeter. There are a few factors in play that I think makes the original Toxic Avenger a fun movie to watch, and I'm going to be judging the other movies within this franchise against that. And these categories are: grossness is a factor, and this could be how gory it is, how toxic dump looking it is, how much waste, just the general look and feel of the movie. That is one factor. The second factor is silliness. How goofy the movie is, how little it takes itself seriously, how it uses its characters to make the movie overall fun. 3, heroics. How heroic Toxie himself is, because in the original movie, he is a pure-hearted, good guy who just happens to smash people's heads in and rips their arms off. But at the end of the day, he is a Boy Scout, he is a good guy, he is like a sweet young man. So that is a good factor of the original movies. The fourth category is cringe. And now cringe is one where I think there is a balance factor to it. You don't want it to go too cringe. You want it to be just enough cringe that it fits in this kind of endearing, goofy section, but you don't want it to go too far into it that it makes it just bad and annoying. And like cringe, the fifth and final factor is trashiness. With trashiness, just like cringe, you don't want it to get to the point where it's just a sleazy, exploitative movie. You want to strike a balance where it's trashy to the point of fun, but not trashy to the point that you feel like a pervert is using money to get girls topless. So I think those are 5 fun factors to run the rest of the movies through, and I'm calling it the Toximeter. And here's a little graphic I came up with. The Toxic Avenger 2 was released in 1989 and it was written and directed by Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hers. This movie is a decent follow-up to the original Toxic Avenger. It does not quite live up to the complete splendor of its original movie, but there are a lot of fun things that happen within this one, and we can talk a little bit about that. One thing right up front that you will notice is that this movie's action scenes are stretched out a lot longer, and I think that's because they have very little story to go into this movie. They pull out all the stops for the first action scene when the villains attack a school for the blind, which Toxie's girlfriend, which is now named Claire, for some reason they renamed the character of Sarah to Claire. Still the same character, a blind woman. Her voice is a little bit more annoying, a little bit more high-pitched, and so is Toxie's. That's another thing you'll notice right away. The voice difference between Toxie in the first movie and this one is pretty noticeable, and the voice is very similar from this movie on. He has a little bit of a higher pitched young guy voice, whereas the first movie was a bit deeper. He still had like the same way of talking, being a bit dorky, but his voice was a lot deeper in the first one. And everybody in this movie, not just Sarah, Claire, whatever you want to call her, has been recasted. Nobody is the same. If they're reoccurring characters, they're completely different than the ones that they were before. However, there is one case. We do get Cigar Face back in this one, who is just this kind of funny, dumb side villain that for some reason pops up in this movie and pops up in all of them, which I kind of appreciate. I actually like this guy, this actor. I wouldn't say he's particularly good or anything like that, but he has like a kind of charm to him that I think really fits the tone of these movies. So I'm happy every time that cigar face shows up in these movies. The villains send a gaggle of goons to attack Toxie at the school for the blind, and it's a murderous row of dumb stereotypes. And this kind of plays into the toxic meter here when I mentioned things being trashy or in bad taste. This kind of gets that meter going a little bit. But at the end, we see a familiar face, somebody who rises to B-movie prominence later on in his career. We get the first appearance in a film ever from Michael Jai White, who I, of course, know and love from the 1997 masterpiece Spawn. I'm being very sarcastic there. That movie is awful, but I do really love Michael Jai White. He is a great action movie star. Seems like somebody who should have been in more things, who should have had a bigger, more prominent career. I think the biggest movie he was ever in, which is actually quite a big movie, is The Dark Knight, where he plays a side villain who is attacked by the Joker. So the basic plot of the movie is that Toxie, Melvin, whatever you want to call him, feels like he is lost and hopeless and needs to reconnect with his father, who he has been told by a planted therapist by the villains that he lives in Japan. So, for almost no reason at all, Toxie goes to Japan. I remember in a trauma documentary, they had struck up some kind of deal with a Japanese entertainment company. This is all stuff that I have a vague memory of. It's not all concrete. I'm sure somebody out there knows it much better than I do. But because of Sergeant Kabuki Man, they had some kind of deal with a Japanese entertainment company, and I get the feeling that this was probably part of that deal where they were able to cut corners and cut costs because of that, and also film part of the Toxic Avenger 2 in Japan. But there is actually a lot of good gags, a lot of weird, funny, dumb, gross effects. I think that a lot of the grossness does still fit the Toxic Avenger. We do get a lot more potty humor, which seems to be Lloyd Kaufman's obsession. I don't know who was able to restrain Lloyd Kaufman from making too much potty humor in the first movie. He really starts to put his foot on the gas and then, just goes off the rail starting with this movie, and it just gets worse as time goes on. So, in the cringe department, this is when we start really ramping up the cringe, where the balance starts to tip the scales, where it's no longer straddling the line of being cringe fun to cringe terrible. And so we do get some cringe terrible in this movie, but I think overall it kind of still straddles the line, and it's not as terrible as movies that happen later on do. One thing I've noticed about low budget movies is that when they don't have any money, one thing that they could bring to add value to their film, to get people to watch, to make it seem, I guess, legitimate in some way, is to get a topless woman in it. And trauma movies are definitely guilty of that. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm not like a prude or anything, but you do see that it is a crutch that they are leaning on. It just doesn't seem to exist for any other reason than to give the audience a bit of a thrill. And so for that reason, that's why I call it kind of exploitative. It doesn't seem like it is done in an artful or interesting way. It's just like, hey, here's some breasts. And then the second half of the movie, after Toxie resolves his issues in Japan, the movie kind of just seems to go nowhere. The plot is basically completely lost at that point, and we're just doing action for the fact that they needed some action. I will say that the action scenes are basically pretty damn good throughout the entire movie, so you see where the budget of this one, I assume it's increased. You see where it goes in that you have these cool car chases, this nice house explosion in the beginning, just them shooting in Japan at all. You get a lot of interesting looking characters, enemies, and villains, costumes. There's a lot going on for this movie. However, it just does not have a coherent story to go by. And I know people are like, well, it's a Toxic Avenger movie. It's just supposed to be dumb. It's just supposed to be silly. It's just supposed to be gross. It's like, I get all of that, but you can do all of those things and still have a story that is worth telling, a story that is interesting. The first movie did it. It's not by any means a perfect story, but it is one that you can follow. It's one that has an internal set logic, and it's not one that just exists for gags. It is a movie that holds up under its own weight. This movie is teetering, it's sinking. It has some good stuff in it, but the foundation of it is not strong enough to hold it up entirely. This movie is kind of, you know, those weird old houses that kind of start to slant over time. The Toxic Avenger 2 is one of those movies. It's not quite busted yet. It hasn't fallen apart. Its walls are still standing, but it is on shaky ground. And because it doesn't really have that strong of a story, it really does falter in the heroics aspect of the Toximeter. The Toxic Avenger in this one just is not as heroic as he was in the previous films. He does still have that Boy Scout attitude to him, but it's like he's kind of just wandering around, not really doing anything. He's searching for his father, so that story doesn't lend itself to a lot of heroics to begin with, but he does do some small things here or there. There's just not this big overarching problem that he has to deal with. Well, it's weird because there is a threat that he has to try to overcome. There's this criminal organization called Apocalypse Inc. that is sending threats his way. However, nothing really happens to that group at the end of it. There's no comeuppance for its villains. They kind of just send goons to him. He handles the problem, and then that's it. There's no big struggle that Toxie has to go through. So on the Toximeter, I give this a 4 out of 6 toxicity. There is fun to be had with this movie, but it is definitely a step down from the original. Can you stop chewing on the box so I can record my video? And of course, the Toxic Avenger theme song in part 2 is nowhere. It seems like you purposely do it when I start talking. And of course, the theme song in Toxic Avenger Part 2 is nowhere as good as Body Talk from the first movie. Body Talk is a complete classic. I listen to it every day. It is one of the bangers of all time. Ugh. Banger. I'm too old to be saying bangers. If you've seen Toxic Avenger Part 2, you've already seen the Toxic Avenger Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie. They are basically the same movie, and it looks like they were released the same year, so they were probably made at around the same time. Claire, who was originally Sarah, who had been renamed to Claire in the second movie, is now played by the same actress as she was in the second movie, so at least there's one consistent thing. The movie starts with a huge recap. I think it's just an excuse to pad out time to make this movie a little bit longer to get it to what is considered a feature-length movie. And like in part 2, we get an extended, long opening action scene. This one is not quite as good, but there was actually a really cool gag at the very beginning where Toxie shoves a thug's hand into a VCR. We get the image of his hand projected onto a TV screen, which makes no sense at all, but it's completely fine because it looks cool, and tears his arm off. And that was a pretty good gag right there at the beginning, kind of draws you into this movie. And now I have a really big problem with the fact that they really dive into meta humor in this movie. I really dislike, I would even openly say that I hate meta humor in any appearance that it makes. Meta humor is just the death of comedy to me in a film. And yes, that includes Deadpool. I do not think Deadpool is funny. I didn't think he was funny as a comic book character. I don't think he's funny as a movie character. And to me, it's just a sign of the fact that the writers have no ideas, so they go into this self-referential mode and try to get any kind of gag out of it that they can. Oh, you know what would be funny? If we reference the fact that this is a movie within this movie, it's going to blow people's minds. Isn't it genius? Isn't it so funny? Isn't it creative and clever? No, it's just dumb. I feel like if you're going to make a story, and a story that has humor, horror, anything like that, those elements of the story should come from within. You shouldn't have to use outside things to make a story function. To me, by definition, it means that the story does not function, that you have to make self-referential jokes like that. I know that's going to be one of the takes I have that people are not going to like, but I just can't get into meta humor. It just comes off as cheap and dumb and easy to me, and in no type of media have I ever liked it. So for me, the cringe level on the Toximeter goes to bad cringe. Just the meta humor alone kills it for me. And they also tank the heroic side of Toxie in this movie, where the villains get the great idea of hiring the Toxic Avenger to do bad things for them. And that is completely opposed to the Toxic Avenger from the previous two films, which was as I mentioned before, a do-gooder. So him being hired to do bad things, to pollute the town that he is from, just is completely out of character for him, and they tank that side of it as well. He barely even has an internal crisis about it. He's just trying to raise money for Claire to get eye surgery so that she's able to see again. But I think the story would have been a lot better if the money for Claire's eye surgery was dangled in front of Toxie by the villains, and he has to kind of find alternative methods to get that from them than him directly working for them and doing obviously blatantly terrible things. You really lose the spirit of the Toxic Avenger in this one. Like this, the second movie wasn't quite as good as the first, but Toxie still felt like a hero. This one, once again, doesn't have a story like the second movie, and what little story it does have completely betrays the character. And I know I'm going to keep going back to this, and I hate trying to explain myself on this. It's the Toxic Avenger. It's dumb. Just because something is dumb doesn't mean it can't have internal consistency, doesn't mean it can't have some kind of integrity to carry it through. And the integrity of the Toxic Avenger as the character he is kind of dead. And there is a reason why people only think about the first movie when we think about this series. It's because of those things chip away at the integrity of the story and the integrity of the characters that people don't care about the rest of it. So clearly what I'm saying does matter, because I think that if it did have the internal consistency as the original movie did, it's possible that these movies would have continued to gain popularity. Instead, they died out, and after a few failed movies and a failed cartoon and a failed musical, we're finally getting a reimagining, and hopefully they bring that little bit of heart, that little bit of integrity to this movie that the other projects didn't have. Despite not really liking the plot of Toxie working for the villains, there is an aspect I do kind of like within that, where Toxie does become like this yuppie social climber, like office work type of guy. I think that is kind of a funny like character dynamic that they could approach it with, where Toxie becomes an American Psycho style corporate shark, and they even mention Donald Trump at some point while he is in that phase. So I do think that's funny. There is something there that they could have grown into a story that would have worked, but this movie just throws out so many things that don't connect to each other that even the good things about it fall flat. This one's interesting here on the trashiness meter because there is less nudity in this, and I can't even think about off the top of my head any nudity scenes. However, Claire is frequently writhing around with her camel toe straight into the camera, so you're kind of picking your poison on this one. It's either blatant nudity, which part two had a lot of, or very sexual writhing around by a scantily clad woman. Something about it in this movie does feel dirtier, even though there's not a lot of actual nudity going on in it. So you can pick your poison on this one. Like I said before, don't mind it in any movie. I don't think it really completely passes that trashiness thing like the second one does. I just think the sheer amount of it in the second movie, and the fact that a lot of the nudity takes place in Japan, kind of feels like some weird kind of sex tourism thing that I don't want to come off as I'm accusing Lloyd Kaufman of anything. I'm not. It just gives you that kind of feeling. And so overall, I feel like the second movie feels a little bit trashier than this one, but this movie is more cringe because of the meta humor. It is a poorer story. It does sell out that heroic end of Toxie where it just doesn't really exist anymore. We do get more toilet humor, but not quite as bad as it ends up getting. So the silliness factor is about the same as it has been in the other ones. And I would say even the grossness factor is down a little bit. There's not that much action, gore, or violence in this one. Or I shouldn't say that. There is some action. There's just not that much gore as there is in the other ones. And when things do happen, like that videotape scene, it is pretty cool. We do kind of get a resolution to the Apocalypse Incorporated thing where the leader of Apocalypse Inc. becomes the devil at the end and puts Toxie through several trials. The story doesn't really build or hint that the villain is the devil, so it does kind of come out of nowhere, and I think kind of undermines them a little bit. It's the devil. If he is this all-powerful evil thing, why would he waste his time with minor thugs and trying to run an evil corporation? I feel like the devil is something that they could have built to after he defeated the Apocalypse Inc. villains. And the trials that Toxie goes through are all pretty dumb, pretty bad, unexciting, uneventful. This movie doesn't really have any of the grossness. It's overall just a poor offering, not just compared to the grand scheme of things, but also to Toxic Avenger films overall. The Toxic Avenger Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie, gets a 2 on the Toximeter. Citizen Toxie, The Toxic Avenger Part 4 was released in 2000 and was directed by Lloyd Kaufman and written by Lloyd Kaufman and about 6 other people. And this movie is awful. It's terrible on every level. It doesn't live up to any part of what made the original Toxic Avenger good. It is all just toilet humor. And this movie, I just want to say, this movie has the audacity to start with a Stan Lee voiceover that states that, yes, the original Toxic Avenger is good. Part 2 and 3 were bad. We disavow those movies, but part 4, this one's going to be good. So you should really get into this one. And then proceeds to be the worst movie in the entire series. It is the worst movie that I've seen this year. I hadn't seen it until just this year when I've been doing this video. And it is all around a dreadful experience. It has everything I hated about part 3, where it has a ton of meta humor. It is a cameo bait. There's a lot of cameos from B and C level celebrities. There is even a cameo, of course, by Ron Jeremy. There is just so much dumb stuff in this. And you would think that after 15 plus years that this movie would look better than the original Toxic Avenger or even 2 and 3. However, this movie looks much worse. It doesn't have that nice film quality that the first movie has, and it looks way cheaper as far as effects goes. This Toxic Avenger just does not look good in any way, the character himself. This movie is a total fail all the way down the list on the toxic meter. However, I would say that it does at least have grossness, but this is when Lloyd Kaufman fully indulges in his toilet humor and just goes way overboard with it with poop jokes. This is like a child's dream. It sank so low that the foundation of this movie is at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and the house had burned down decades ago. This movie is pure trash. And I know a lot of people just think that trauma movies are just trash right off the bat. And it's like, yeah, compared to great classic movies, I could see that. But there is a level of charm in that 80s run of trauma movies, that ends in the early 90s, that this movie does not capture at all. Toxie's makeup looks like crap. I'll admit, I actually like the performance of the actor of Toxie in this one. I think he kind of exudes that goofball charm that Toxie should have, but the character itself does not display any of those heroics. He is just a violent psychopath, and in the movie where he is a violent psychopath who has to fight against an evil version of himself, it really doesn't make any sense. It's like, who cares? He's just a bad guy all around, so why does it really matter? It's a dumb movie. It's bad. It is a little bit more plot forward than 2 and 3. However, it still kind of folds in that department. It doesn't really have anything that is worth stringing along. And it is more just a series of cringe jokes, offensive humor, purposely made to get a rise out of people, purposely made to get the jollies up of the type of person who's like, yeah, take that. Did that offend you? Those sorts of people where it's like, I do like offensive humor. I do find it funny, but there has to actually be the humor part of offensive humor. And it's just like these dull jokes that are so played out. Even in 2000, you didn't come off as like a cool guy by making these kind of jokes. You didn't really come off as dangerous. It's just dumb and bad. And it feels even worse now watching it 25 years later. So yes, this movie goes overboard in the cringe meter, where the good cringe is massively outweighed by the bad cringe. It's just failed joke after failed joke. The trashiness is above board as well, where this movie is just like Lloyd Kaufman getting young, impressionable women to be topless who like, hey, I got a chance to be in a trauma movie. This trauma movie that looked like it was made for about $20. I got to be naked in it. Isn't that awesome? This movie does have a lot of the grossness side of the toximeter. However, the gore is cheaper and faker looking than ever, so it doesn't really come through in a way that it should. It just looks like a cheap knockoff of the Toxic Avenger. And while I was watching it, it did cross my mind that a lot of the gore in this movie does look like it's from a Guar concert. But the thing about a Guar concert is that it is done live, and so they have to deal with a lot of limitations that you don't have to do in a movie. But the movie somehow barely lives up to the standards of a Guar concert. And really, all of the other things that I've put together on the Toximeter This movie just does not live up to any of this. This movie is an absolute zero, and it's a damn shame because they buttered it up and they made it seem like this was going to be the resurgence of the Toxic Avenger, and it falls completely on its face. It is awful. Don't watch this movie. If you can take one bit of advice from me, it's to skip this movie. So I think it's safe to say that the Toxic Avenger sequels did not live up to the fun charm of the original movie, and the series as a whole is kind of rotten. It's kind of stinky, and it's kind of toxic. So the remake that is coming out very soon here has a good chance of overcoming a lot of the bad things about the sequels. But wait, I have more because there is also a Toxic Avenger musical. I am not a musical guy at all. In fact, I would say I hate them. I don't really find a lot of redeeming things about musicals. I think in general, they are very dumb and annoying. That is my very critical, very well thought analysis on musicals. But I did watch the Toxic Avenger musical, and I'm going to say a little bit about it. It's not very good. But I do want to say is I'm impressed by the performances by the actors. It's crazy that there's only 5 actors in this movie and they play multiple characters and do a good job of it. So I do want to give them credit. They did put together a good production. However, I think the sense of humor that a musical theater kid has is completely different than mine, and nothing is funny in this at all. I did not find a single thing to be humorous that made me laugh or chuckle. It's just dork humor. There is also still a little bit of meta humor, and musical theater dorks, theater kids love meta humor. I think that's for them. It is not at all for me. So there's a little bit of that in here as well. I was surprised to see there is a bit of gore. It's not as well done. There's only so much you can do with that limitations that they have, but they do try to get those elements into the musical, so I do appreciate it. I'm not going to rate it on the Toximeter or anything, but if you do like musicals and you do like that kind of production, it may be worth checking out. But I feel like even then, it's on the very cheap end, and the sets don't really change very much. So I think it might have been something that would be more fun to see on like a limited run, but is not really worth your time as an overall project. And finally, The Toxic Crusaders, which was a cartoon that had a very short run in 1991. I did watch this show as a kid, but I don't really remember much about it. I do remember having some of the toys. I had Toxie, I had the big rat nose nose zone, um, and I had the headbangers, the two-headed guys. So I do remember having those toys as I was a kid. I think Nose Zone had a thing where you'd put like boogers in his back and he squeezed a thing and boogers would shoot out of his giant nose. I vaguely remember that, but I'm not 100% sure. What this show nails that everything else doesn't is that Melvin slash Toxie is a heroic character. He is a guy who just wants to do good in this strange, bad world. And it doesn't matter if things are falling apart around him, he's always going to do the right thing. So the Toxic Crusader, it has that heart that Toxie needs that the other sequels just don't have at all. And I know a lot of people think that it's very weird that a rated R B movie that had blood, guts, nudity, swears in it became a kids show. However, if you were around in the early 90s, you would know that gross out humor was a big thing among especially young boy audiences at that time. We were inundated with gross out stuff, booger monsters. There's Booger Man, Earthworm Jim. There were so many of these things that were just like, hey, isn't this gross thing fun? And in the 90s, when I was a 6 year old when this movie came out, yes, it was. It was fun. So I enjoyed the grossness of it when I was a kid. But the rest of the show kind of plays out like you would expect a Saturday morning cartoon would, although it had that kind of fun, gross, goofy edge. But it is still kind of a kid's cartoon. There's not too much there to sink your teeth into. It's not bad by any means. This is like the sort of thing where I could put on in the background while I'm painting and catch a funny joke or two or catch a fun action scene. It is like a solid 90s kids cartoon. So, of course, it falls short on every level of the Toximeter, but it really does excel in that kind of heart, that heroic end of the Toxic Avenger series. And I think for that, it just feels like an overall better project than the other movies. And it's something that I hope that the remake, or I should say reimagining of Toxic Avenger that is coming out, a few days from now, really captures. And you have a really good actor in Peter Dinklage who I think can bring back that aspect of heart and heroics to the Toxic Avenger if the story calls for that. And I hope it does, because you could just have a gross out thing, and that's cool and that's fun. But if we don't have characters to care about, and if we don't have characters that have good goals, then the movie just kind of falls flat. Like I said, that is the foundation. If it doesn't have that foundation, everything else is just artifice. Like, who cares about what's happening? You got to have something to care about, even in dumb movies. As stupid as it is, it's better for somebody to take these sorts of things seriously because it makes these experiences more worthwhile. So take your dumb movie, take your dumb idea, and work hard and make it as good as you possibly can. Don't do everything with irony. Like, actually put your foot down and stand behind what you're doing. Everything doesn't have to be ironic. Isn't this so dumb? Isn't it so funny because it's stupid? Isn't it so cool because it's bad? It's like, no, try to make a thing, really put something out there, really make some effort, and really put your neck on the line for something that you made. That's what makes things great. Don't half-heartedly do these things and be like, well, wasn't even really trying to begin with. That is such cope to protect your ego. You'll never evolve as an artist. You'll never evolve as somebody who makes something if you don't really put yourself into it and go full force ahead. Yes, you'll get hurt when you smash into that brick wall, but maybe by the 100th time you've done it, you'll actually crash through. You'll never get through if you're half-hearted and you don't fully commit to that project. I did not expect to go on a rant quite like that. So thank you for watching this video. I had a great time revisiting the original Toxic Avenger. Despite not liking the sequels, I still enjoyed going through them and analyzing it and really putting a lot of thought into what makes these bad movies enjoyable. Please consider liking and subscribing. A comment would be cool too. Let me know what you think about this painting. I actually really like this one. I think it turned out pretty good this time. And I will see you in the next video where I'm likely going to be reviewing the new Toxic Avenger. Goodbye.
But it was just so funny how I was just not paying attention to my son. Like, honestly, as a parent, like, what was that
Single
about?
mom, you're working
Single
a
mom,
lot.
yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like,
Do what you can to keep you entertained.
exactly. When I'm trying to cook and clean and be a mom. But it was so funny how I just looked and I was like, what in the world? That was so hilarious, but it didn't have an effect on you. I mean, that was something that I always wondered if it did anything, like, mentally.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and everybody's going to be a little bit different on that, but for me, like, I think it only affected me in a positive way, in the sense that, like,
Sure.
it did take me down this road of, like, trying to understand how these things are made and looking at it from the perspective of that, as opposed to just purely entertainment.
Yeah.
And Toxic Avenger is maybe not the catalyst for that, but it is just in a long string of things where it's like, these people are doing something, these people are making something, and I want to make something too. Ultimately, I didn't go down the path of movie making, and I don't think I really ever would. But it still puts you in that mindset of, like, okay, being a creative person, what does that mean? How do we make it work? And that's why I've always been like so highly self-motivated to do creative things. Because I see other people highly self-motivated making their own movies.
Exactly.